In the northern Gaza Strip, the IDF has arrested 240 Hamas terrorists, including 15 individuals known to have participated in the October 7, 2023 massacre. The mass capture of these terrorists happened because they walked into a trap that the IDF and the Shin Bet set up for them, entering the Kamal Radwan hospital, thinking they'd be safe in that location. But then, the IDF surrounded the hospital and let those inside know that they needed to surrender. Further south, the Israeli Air Force attacked the Houthis in Yemen on Thursday night, sending 25 fighter jets over 2,000 kilometers to strike strategic targets, including 3 Houthi fighter jets parked at the international airport in Sana'a. Power stations and port facilities controlled by the Houthis were also struck in what is assessed to be the largest attack sustained by the Houthis since this war began. This strike happened almost at the same time as the Houthi leader was making a premature victory speech. However, despite the massive damage that they have sustained, the Houthis still managed to fire ballistic missiles at central Israel early Friday and Saturday morning, sending millions of residents to their bomb shelters and protected spaces. Although these missiles were intercepted outside Israel's airspace, the Houthis issued a statement threatening to blow up Tel Aviv and Israel's Ben Gurion International Airport. TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst Mati Shoshani will give us an in-depth look at this situation later on in the broadcast. His report will include questions that are being asked about the effectiveness of such strikes and how the Houthis remain Iran's largest and most significant asset in this region. And speaking of Iran, the regime that rules that country also issued a statement over the weekend that 2025 will be important regarding the nuclear issue, without providing any additional details. In a related story, we will review how Iran's Revolutionary Guards tried to kidnap an Israeli reporter from the Lebanese border. And speaking of Lebanon, we will also cover a threat by Hezbollah to end the ceasefire agreement before the 60-day period is over. This is because the IDF keeps operating in villages on the Lebanese side of the border, finding and demolishing tunnels, bunkers, and seemingly endless stockpiles of weapons and ammunitions. In the last few days, a tunnel leading to a major Hezbollah headquarters was found and demolished by the IDF combat engineers. Hezbollah is furious over this and similar revelations by the IDF, and has threatened to renew hostilities if the Lebanese National Army doesn't move into southern Lebanon and compel the IDF to withdraw. All of this raises the question whether this ceasefire will continue holding, and if not, how much capacity Hezbollah still has to act against Israel. And meanwhile, just a few kilometers to the east of southern Lebanon, in southern Syria, the IDF is setting up defensive positions and has acquired strategic assets that are driving our enemies crazy. There's a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Yair Pinto, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what's happening in Israel on day 449 of the war with Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, and all the Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq. All of them are acting under the auspices of Iran's Revolutionary Guards Corps, the head of the axis of evil in the Middle East. I'd also like to introduce you to our sponsor for today's video, Magen David Adom. This is Israel's medical first response team, saving lives 24 hours every day, every single day of the year. If you're in Israel and you're sick, injured, wounded, about to give birth, or have any other medical emergency, Magen David Adom will be there to help. I'll tell you more about them later in the video, but first, the news. Iron sounded on Saturday afternoon in Jerusalem and the Lachish area, after 2 rockets were fired towards Israeli territory from the northern Gaza Strip. This was the first time that sirens went off in the Jerusalem area due to incoming rocket fire from Gaza in almost a year. The rockets were launched from the town of Bet Hanun in the northern Gaza Strip, where forces from the IDF's Nachal Brigade deployed in the last 24 hours following intelligence reports on the presence of terrorists and terror infrastructure. The IDF has cleared this city several times over the past year. According to the IDF statement, prior to the force's entry, Israeli Air Force fighter jets, in cooperation with artillery fire, attacked multiple terror targets in the area, including terrorist concentrations and additional terror infrastructure of the Hamas terrorist organization. At the same time, the IDF announced that a joint IDF Shin Bet operation at Hamas's terror headquarters in Kamal Adwan Hospital in the Jabalia refugee camp had concluded, with more than 240 terrorists arrested in that area. The focused activity against terror targets in the hospital area was based on intelligence indicating that the complex had again become a Hamas terror stronghold and a refuge for terrorists, despite repeated calls to refrain from using medical facilities for military activity. At the start of the operation, the 401st Armored Brigade troops encircled the hospital, arrested terrorists hiding in the area, and also arrested were 15 individuals known to have taken part in the October 7th massacre against Israel. Some of the detainees tried posing as patients or medical staff, while others attempted to flee in ambulances. In preliminary field interrogations, many terrorists who came out of the hospital admitted that they participated in terror activities in the area. In a related story, over the weekend, a 2-kilometer Hamas tunnel was destroyed following extensive clearing and survey work by combat engineers attached to the 401st Armored Brigade. Its length was about 2 kilometers and it was used by Hamas terrorists for extended stays. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to update you on every development in the Gaza Strip. A moment before we continue, I'd like to once again invite you to click on that subscribe button. This really helps us reach more people with the truth, and according to our analytics data, around 60% of our regular viewers are not yet subscribers to this channel. Shifting our focus now to another big story from the past week, and that's the increased tempo of ballistic missile attacks against Israel by the Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen. In retaliation for these attacks, last Thursday, the Israeli Air Force carried out Operation Tzlilei HaKerem, or Sounds of the Vineyard in English. This was the largest attack against the Houthis so far in this war, involving 25 strike planes, electronic warfare, and refueling aircrafts. The decision to carry out the operation in daylight was made to maximize hits on Houthi operatives and infrastructure, but they also had a relatively low profile in order to preserve the element of surprise. According to the report in the Saudi-owned El Arabiya news portal, the targets struck at the airport included at least 3 fighter jets which were destroyed. Other targets of the strike on the airport included the control tower that went out of service, plus civilian aircrafts used by the Houthi government. In addition, infrastructure in the ports of Hodeidah, Es Salif, and Ras Kantib on Yemen's western coast were attacked. These infrastructures served, amongst other things, to transfer Iranian weaponry into the area and to bring Iranian officials into the region. An IDF statement said that this group constitutes a major branch of the entire Iranian axis and is responsible for undermining regional order and disrupting global freedom of navigation. The Houthis operate as an independent terror entity reliant on Iranian cooperation and financing for the purpose of harming the State of Israel and its citizens. The IDF will not hesitate to act decisively and strike anyone constituting a threat to Israel's civilians, at whatever distance is required. And speaking of statements by senior officials, the Israeli strike, as mentioned, coincided exactly with the speech by the leader of the Houthi terrorist organization, Abdul Malik Badr el-Din el-Houthi. he has been in hiding for many years, and his regular Thursday speeches, in which he frequently boasts about harming Israel, are required content for all TV channels that operate in territory controlled by the Houthis. During his televised remarks last Thursday, he claimed that Israeli deterrence failed against the country, despite the strikes that hit civilian facilities in Sana'a and Hodeidah. The Israeli enemy is aware that our operations continue, are effective, and have an impact. Our missiles, which the Israeli Defense Forces failed to intercept, have caused great frustration amongst political and security elements in Israel and the United States. About an hour after this speech, as reports on strikes started flowing in, the Houthis rushed to issue a threat in response. On one outlet, they promised a Yemeni response is coming. You Zionists, you will not sleep. The Israeli officials admitted that the Houthis are a tough nut to crack and that deterring them is difficult. The vast distance between Israel and Yemen, as well as the large areas the Houthis have to operate in, and the difficult terrain, make this a complicated military problem. The prevailing understanding in Israel is that one more strike alone won't solve the problem and that a more fundamental, deep transformation is required. However, there is also a consensus emerging in Jerusalem that it will not be possible to decisively deal with this problem before the inauguration of the incoming Trump administration on January 20th. There is hope that the new administration will see the need for a stronger response against the Houthis and their Iranian masters. All of this added fuel to a debate in Israel over the best way to respond, with many voices saying that the quickest and most effective way to end the attacks from the Houthis in Yemen would be to strike a decisive blow against their Iranian sponsors in Iran. On the other hand, some in the IDF argued that the Iranians' influence on the Houthis is not the same as their influence on Hezbollah, that the Houthis are a sort of wild independent child. Therefore, claimed a senior official, such a strike not only wouldn't achieve the goal of deterring the Houthis, it could reopen a direct front with Iran. In any case, against the backdrop of the threats that Israel has made in recent days, the Houthis have already prepared for a possible attack, raising their alert level and ordering shipping companies to clear their warehouses in the port of Hodeidah, according to reports in the Saudi-owned Ashrak El-Awsat news portal. They have also continued firing ballistic missiles at central Israel. 2:11 a.m. on Saturday morning, sirens wailed in Jerusalem, sending residents running to protected spaces and shelters. Although this is the first time in several months that Jerusalemites have had to do this, it was the 5th night in a row for residents of other cities in central Israel. Although most of these incoming missiles are intercepted outside Israeli airspace, debris and shrapnel has landed inside Israeli communities, causing damage to buildings and infrastructure. They could potentially cause injuries to people as well if it wasn't for the protected spaces. Still, there are people who are injured in these incidents, falling downstairs or otherwise getting hurt while trying to rush to a protected space. On Saturday morning, Magen David Adom reported treating 18 people who were hurt in this way, as well as 2 others who are suffering from shock and anxiety. These were just the latest victims of this war that have been treated by Magen David Adom over the past 15 months. Countless other people have also been treated by them for everything from accidents at work, at home, or on the road, heart attacks, burns, terrorist shooting attacks, and everything else that you can imagine. Of course, one of the most common medical emergencies in Israel is a pregnant woman who needs assistance to give birth, since Israel has one of the highest birth rates in the entire world. In all of these situations, Magen David Adom volunteers are at work, taking care of the sick, wounded, injured, and hurt, 24 hours a day, every single day of the year. Most of the workers are volunteers, but they are all highly trained and motivated to do this vitally important work. But they need help from people like you, who care about Israel because their budget comes entirely from donations. So if you want to make a donation to Magen David Adom, you can do so by visiting the website www.savelifeisrael.com. Now back to the news, and I'm going to send it over to my friend and colleague, TBN Israel's senior Middle East analyst, Mati Shoshani, who will give us a closer look at what's happening over the weekend in our neighborhood, including some insights on the results of the strike in Yemen. Also, he'll take a look at an interesting comment by Iran's foreign minister, who recently said that 2025 will be important in the context of his country's nuclear program, as well as the incoming Trump administration and growing calls in Israel to strike Iran's nuclear facilities. Mati, take it away.
Thank you, Yair, and happy Hanukkah to all our viewers. In the last recent weeks, since the ceasefire with Hezbollah was concluded in Lebanon and Bashar al-Assad's regime collapsed in Syria, the Houthis have become the last Iranian proxy standing. They are the only tentacle of the Iranian octopus which has yet to be significantly hurt. But it's important to understand that the Iranians do not have the same level of control over the Houthis as they do over Hezbollah. To be sure, Iran provides the Houthis with intelligence guidance plus massive financial assistance, as well as direct guidance and support from the Quds Force and Hezbollah operatives on the ground in Yemen. They also provide training to Houthi fighters in Iran and massive logistical support. However, the Houthis also have their own sources of revenue and material. That's because Yemen has some natural resources and economic activity that the Houthis ruthlessly tax and exploit for their own benefit, leaving the population of nearly 33 million people to fend for themselves. This all allows the Houthis to operate with a greater degree of independence from Iranian influence compared to others, and they also exploit the Palestinian issue, which gives them considerable support in the Arab and Sunni Muslim world, despite their association with the Shiite axis led by the Iranian. And meanwhile, strikes on the Houthis by Israel, as well as the US and British forces, have not had the desired effect of stopping them from launching further UAV and ballistic missile strikes on Israel, and continuing to harass ships attempting to sail through international waters in the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandab Straits. This is partly because Yemen is already the poorest country in the entire Middle East, and one of the poorest in the world. The Houthis don't care about the Yemeni population, so it is difficult to persuade them to stop their malign activities and terrorism by putting pressure on the Yemeni economy. One alternative, which the Saudis and Emiratis have employed in the past, is to try and bribe the Houthis into ceasing their attacks. But this is simply not practical nor desirable for Israel. On the other hand, the oil-rich Gulf states fear that escalation in the fighting could prompt the Houthis to renew their strikes on energy infrastructure in the region. All of this gives us reason to doubt if the issue will be resolved anytime soon, or that it can be resolved easily at all. Some intelligence estimates are even raising the question about whether or not the Houthi leadership is rational enough to be persuaded or deterred. It is beyond question that they have used very poor judgment in getting involved in this war with Israel and the West in the first place. Once again, it is also evident that they do not care about the civilian population of Yemen, who suffer massive rates of malnutrition, disease, economic deprivation, and a generally low quality of life. Therefore, unless there is a very serious effort, which will have to be led by the Americans, to destroy this group's operational capabilities, this routine, where the residents of central Israel are awakened and sent to bomb shelters in the middle of the night because of the Houthis firing a single ballistic missile at us, could go on for a very long time. However, I'm also quite sure that the Israeli public will not put up with this and demand that their leaders do something about the situation. The problem is that the Houthis do not have organized military bases that the IDF can map and attack. They are embedded in the civilian population, and they control much of the civilian economic infrastructure. The decision might be made to launch massive attacks to destroy this infrastructure in order to put a stop to the Houthi attacks against the State of Israel. I think it's also likely that the threats made by Defense Minister Katz that the Houthi leaders will be assassinated are likely to play out in the near future. In any case, I expect that the days, weeks, and months ahead will continue to see historical events take place here in Israel and throughout the Middle East. Now back to you, Yair.
Thank you, Mati Shoshani. And guys, I want to invite you, our viewers, to visit our news website, tbnisrael.com, to stay updated throughout the day and in between our videos. Shifting our focus to events in Lebanon, the pro-Hezbollah Lebanese media portal El Akbar reported on Saturday morning that as the ceasefire enters its second month, concerns mount that it may reach a breaking point in light of what the IDF is doing in the border villages. On the channel, which serves as the terrorist organization's mouthpiece, it was stated that while Hezbollah is still committed to the agreement, it has begun sending messages that it will not delay implementing what was set out in it concerning Lebanon's right to defend itself. According to El Akbar, if Lebanon's official security forces fail to get Israel to stop its attacks, Hezbollah's forces will step in. To explain what El Akbar is referring to when it is talking about Israeli attacks in Lebanon, the IDF continues to find, clear, and demolish tunnels, bunkers, and other terrorist infrastructures that Hezbollah built in southern Lebanon over the past decades. Hezbollah would like the IDF to stop finding and destroying this infrastructure so they will have an easier time rebuilding their ability to carry out attacks on Israel in the future. The IDF obviously would like to prevent Hezbollah from rebuilding this ability, and on that note, it announced over the weekend that it had demolished another 100-meter-long Radwan force tunnel in southern Lebanon. An IDF statement about the incident said, "The forces, assisted by the Yalom unit fighters who served and cleared the route of explosives and threats, found multiple weapons there, including rifles, machine guns, anti-tank missiles, observation systems, and other military equipment." The statement said all the equipment was confiscated and destroyed, in addition to the underground route discovered near the route that they found a stash of anti-tank missiles and heavy machine gun emplacements aimed at the IDF outposts. The underground route led to a Hezbollah headquarters, where rocket launchers were found that had been used to launch rockets into the Israeli territory over the last year, along with a large quantity of IEDs. This is only the latest example of the IDF's continued activities to degrade Hezbollah. In fact, over the last 30 days that the ceasefire has been in effect, the IDF has destroyed about twice as many Hezbollah positions as it did in the first 14 months of fighting. And according to the IDF, all forces continue removing threats in southern Lebanon in accordance with the understandings between Israel and Lebanon, while upholding the ceasefire conditions. El Akbar, we note, reports continuously on the Israeli activity in southern Lebanon, the area where, according to the ceasefire, armed forces not belonging to Lebanon's official security forces cannot remain. Occasionally, the IDF still carries out airstrikes as well on terror targets it detects in the area, and in some of those strikes, there were casualties. Among other things, they attacked launchers, significant weapons, smuggling routes, and armed terrorists. It is important to recall that after the ceasefire, a mechanism was set up under international supervision to which Israel is supposed to apply if it sees violations by Hezbollah or Lebanon. And additionally, Israel reached understandings with the United States that it would act on its own in the event of what was defined as an immediate threat. Hezbollah has so far refrained from responding to Israel's attacks, except once in early November when it fired mortar shells at Mount Dov, an Israeli location. This might be because of its massively diminished capacity, as it has suffered crushing blows in this war, especially in the 3 months from September to November. It must also be emphasized that the National Army of Lebanon is gradually being deployed into the villages of southern Lebanon. Statements by the National Army indicate that it is also finding and demolishing Hezbollah terror infrastructure as well as weapon stockpiles. This has allowed some IDF units to withdraw back into Israeli territory, but other units are remaining to finish up the work of making sure that Hezbollah can no longer use this area to threaten the communities of northern Israel. The IDF clarified this week that the initial 60 days of the ceasefire is not a sacred date, and the agreement stages will be implemented gradually under an American umbrella, leading the enforcement mechanism for the first time. This is a good place to explain to you, our viewers, that the IDF has captured enough weapons, ammunition, and military equipment from Hezbollah stockpiles in southern Lebanon to arm several divisions. This is in addition to the massive quantities of weapons and ammunition, including a substantial percentage of Hezbollah's much-feared rocket arsenal that was either expended or destroyed during the fighting. It is also important to remember that by their own estimates, Hezbollah lost over 4,000 fighters that were killed in action and more than twice that many wounded, and this included the loss of almost all their senior mid-level leadership and even many junior-level operatives. Hezbollah's threat to renew offensive activities against the IDF must be examined in light of all of this. However, the IDF is not taking any chances setting up outposts near every northern community in order to be able to respond immediately to any future attacks. The IDF will build these outposts in such a way that the forces will have a significant fire array, including mortars, launchers, and machine guns. In parallel, each outpost will have observation capability into deeper territory. Over the last few days, the IDF has been carrying out complex engineering works, for instance, to rebuild a forward outpost in front of Kibbutz Misgav Am. This began with clearing old minefields and otherwise clearing the area on which the outpost will be built. The IDF has built rear defensive lines as well, with positions to fall back on if the forward defenses are breached in a conflict. Another recent decision is that the Galilee Division headquarters, located on the border in Beranit, will relocate to a different base in the north. And during the fighting, Hezbollah concentrated a major effort on attacking Camp Beranit, even firing multiple Burkan rockets containing a large quantity of explosives at the Israeli base. A moment before we continue, I want to ask you to once again help us to spread the truth about what's going on here in Israel by sharing our videos on YouTube, following us on social media, and subscribing to this YouTube channel if you haven't already. These are the ways you can really help us get the truth out to the world. I want to conclude today's report by paying final respects to a hero who died in the defense of Israel. The IDF spokesperson's unit announced on Thursday that Captain Hod Sherebman, 27, from Tzofit, a platoon commander in the multi-dimensional unit 888, fell in the battle in northern Gaza. So please, everyone, keep praying for IDF soldiers wherever they are, in the air, at the sea, or on land. Pray for the swift return of our hostages in Gaza, who are in the hands of Hamas's terrible terrorists. Thank you, Mati Shoshani, for your analysis. And guys, keep praying for the peace upon Israel. And most importantly, don't forget to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. And together, we will win this war.